If you expect something to happen straight away, then you're thinking in a transactional networking mindset, which is not a healthy mindset. Networking is a long game. And so the earlier you can connect with someone and the more that you can keep that engagement going, the better.
Welcome to the Career Relaunch podcast, where my mission is to inspire you to pursue more meaningful work. My name is Joseph Liu, and I'm here to help you gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to overcome the challenges of reinventing your career so you can truly enjoy your professional life. In each episode, I feature people who have stepped off the beaten path to reinvent their careers. We talk through their unique personal journeys, the challenges they overcame, and the lessons they learned along the way to help you understand what it takes to relaunch your own career. Today, my guest is going to share his story of going from serving in the British Army to working at Google Cloud. We'll discuss how professional relationships can open doors in your career and the importance of self-marketing during professional transitions. Afterwards, during today's Mental Fuel, I'll share my thoughts on maintaining strong relationships in your career and life. Today, I'm speaking with Luke Parker, a delivery executive at Google Cloud, where he manages complex air-gapped programs for strategic clients. A former British Army officer with over 11 years of experience, Luke brings a unique perspective on leadership, having transitioned from commanding Royal Engineers explosive ordnance disposal and search teams to driving digital transformation in the public sector. Beyond his role at Google, Luke is a Data IQ Top 100 influencer and the co-founder of Antebellum Angels, a network investing in early-stage defense technologies. He also holds a master's in geospatial intelligence and is a chartered engineer. Now, I first crossed paths with Luke when I heard him speak on a career change panel that followed a talk I gave at Warwick Business School, where he's completing his executive MBA. I decided to invite him to come onto the show because I thought his comments on the panel really stood out as being very thoughtful and practical. And his perspectives of shifting from the military to the tech sector can be useful to anyone who is considering a major career pivot, but is not exactly sure how to lay the groundwork for your transition. You can get all the show notes from today's conversation at careerrelaunch.net/110. Luke spoke with me from London. Hello, Luke, and welcome to the Career Relaunch podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Joseph. Thank you for inviting me.
Before we get into your whole career history, I'd love to start off by just finding out what you have been focused on and what's been keeping you busy in both your professional life and also your personal life, just to get us started.
My day job, I am a delivery leader at Google Cloud, and that keeps you quite busy on its own. I'm finishing off my executive MBA at Warwick Business School currently. And so my thesis is being submitted in the next 4 to 5 weeks. So every spare moment I'm not working, I'm diligently typing to hit the required word count. On top of that, I've got a 2-year-old. For those parents in the listenership that have a 2-year-old, you know that that's a full-time job in itself. But I have a fantastic wife that helps there or does most of the work.
Now, I should also mention that you and I first crossed paths at Warwick Business School, and I was doing a workshop on personal branding. I heard you on a career change panel that followed my workshop. And I know that you did talk a little bit at the time about what I guess your official title is delivery executive at Google Cloud. Could you just give a glimpse into exactly what that means to somebody who maybe isn't familiar with Google Cloud or even what a delivery executive does?
At Google Cloud, a delivery executive leads multifaceted teams delivering the most complex cloud transformation programs. And so, although the term has executive, you are not an executive in the formal sense, but it's a senior delivery role that brings together multiple teams for lighthouse customers.
Great. Now, you haven't always been at Google Cloud, and I would love to just go back in time a little bit. And first of all, just get a sense of where you grew up, where you're from, maybe a little bit about your upbringing and your childhood. And then after that, we can talk about your time in the British Army.
I am from Rotherham in South Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. I lived there until I was about 16. So I had a very good upbringing. South Yorkshire is, I would say, quite a deprived part of the UK. The history of the area used to be quite an industrialized steel and mining part of the UK, which suffered a lot through mining and steelwork shutdowns. But I think I was relatively insulated from that. I went to a great school. At 16, I decided that I was going to join the army, the British Army.
And how did you come to that decision, Luke? Because that's a big decision to move into the military versus, I suppose, continuing on in your education more formally.
My great-grandfather was a soldier in World War II, and I had his medals and his pictures. I didn't really ever get to talk to him about his experiences. I was too young by the time he passed away, but I was always really in awe of the pictures and the medals that he had. And I'd started reading about World War II. And since then, no one in my family has been part of the armed forces. However, I think we're a family of service. My uncle and my sister are in the police force. My mum is part of the NHS. And so I think service kind of runs in our family and giving back. And I saw my kind of call to arms as joining the British Army.
And I understand you would eventually go to the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst. How do you enlist in the Army? What's that selection process like?
There's multiple routes into the Army. The first way, you normally go to a recruitment office and you do an aptitude test, which gives you options for what you can consider. And I was lucky enough that my options enabled me to become an officer or to apply to become an officer directly. There's two routes in, as a direct as an officer or as a soldier. I was presented with the offer to become a what they call an army bursar. At 16, if you pass the selection, and they will pay you a small amount to complete your studies up until 18, so finish your A levels. And you go for a weekend and you have a bunch of tests, physical tests, running, assault course, leadership tests, which involve problem solving. It's all about teamwork and showing leadership potential at that young age. I finished that. I passed. I was given the recommendation that I should become an officer and go to Sandhurst for training when I was of age, which is either 18 or onwards. And I got to 18, so I finished my A levels, and then the army reached out again and said, we'd actually like to offer you a scholarship, and you can go to university and do a bachelor's degree in a subject of your choice. And as long as you get a 2-1, you can proceed to Sandhurst.
I know that you also spent a year doing what I understand is infantry training. Now, I'm not super familiar with how things work in the military or the army. I probably wouldn't last more than a few hours in any sort of training myself in the military. Can you just give a glimpse into that world and also the contrast between being out there doing that sort of military training and then being back in the classroom and how you flipped back and forth between the two?
After I finished my degree, I went to Sandhurst. Sandhurst was established after the Second World War, and it's a 44-week training course to regular officers and reserves and international personnel as well. It takes you from a civilian with just the potential leadership attributes into a British Army second lieutenant, which is the junior officer over that time. And I wasn't in the infantry, but they use that as the training vehicle in that it takes someone down to the rawest form of leadership there is, which is commanding a small team of up to 30, 35 soldiers in arduous, strenuous situations where discipline and courage is paramount, is what I believe to be one of the best ways to train leaders who subsequently want to go and serve in all different parts of the army. But they all go through this same training. And so you are a soldier first and a leader first in that sense.
And it sounds like in the military, which isn't that dissimilar, although it's a very different world, isn't that dissimilar from any career path where you've got to make a decision about where you want to head. And as you just mentioned, there's a lot of different options. How did you go about figuring out where to take yourself? I don't know to what extent you had a choice, but it sounds like you do have some say in which direction to go. And I'd be curious to hear how you went through that thought process of eventually shifting toward engineering.
It's split into 3 terms. And at the end of the first term, you give a bunch of choices that you would be interested in going into when you finish. And at the time, I was really interested in joining the Yorkshire Regiment, which is a infantry regiment. And the other choices were engineers, and I think it was artillery. And after the first term had completed, and you spend, multiple weeks out in a ditch, rained on, hungry, tired, your feet hurt. I was like, is this what I want to do? My internal monologue was, I don't think you would be happy in this role for long. So I started looking what else. My second choice was the Royal Engineers. I've always been a very hands-on, practical person. And the Royal Engineers has such a breadth of different specialities that you can go into, whether that's armored engineering, so tractors and diggers and bridge layers, all the way to being airborne or commando or bomb disposal or a diver or light roll. So there's all sorts of different flavors of combat engineer. And I thought that that would give me a fantastic breadth of experience, which if I became disenfranchised with a part of the engineers, you could always re-roll into a different part of engineering. So it offered a really flexible career for the long haul.
How was that experience overall for you up until this point of being in the military? And I suppose what's behind my question is trying to get an understanding of whether at this point you saw yourself remaining in the military as an engineer, or like at what point did you start to think that this was maybe just the beginning of something else?
When I first commissioned, I truly believed that I was going to be a career soldier. A career for an officer spans normally between 18 and 25 years or so. And I thought I was in it for the long haul, especially at the start, because you've come out of 44 weeks of hard graft. I don't think you would last that 44 weeks if you were just in it for like, I'm just here for a couple of years.
What made you deviate from that path? And my understanding when we last spoke before we started recording was that it's actually probably the most common path to just stay in the Army. So I'd be curious, do you remember the moment that triggered you to then deviate from that path?
I think it was maybe, I would say, starting to get into, say, 6 to 8 years in. So my early career was great. I loved being at 101. I was a Royal Engineer Search Advisor. That person leads a team in trying to locate bombs and IEDs. I left there and I joined a training regiment, and I led what's called instructor troop. So this troop selects the instructors across the Corps, which is arguably one of the most important jobs, being an instructor in the Corps, because you're bringing the next generation of soldiers through. I then was sent to do a master's degree in geospatial intelligence, and I started to get a sense of a more technical route. And the story that joined the two together, I started to notice when I was in the EOD, was finding bombs and IEDs. There's a pattern in space and time, and it's the linkage between psychology and ground and capability. And that means that you can use analytics to determine where is more likely to be a bomb. I started to hone this skill in, and it started to get me interested in the wider world of analytics and data. That started to get me thinking about what might be out there.
I think this happens sometimes, Luke, where you're in a particular field and you start to get an inkling that there might be something else out there. Was there anything in particular that then convinced you that you need to more proactively explore different paths, perhaps outside of the military? And I'm just going to float out one of the things that you mentioned to me in our past conversation was that I know that you were doing a lot of personal writing when you were in the military. So I'd be curious to hear what role that played, and also just how you made the choice to explore something outside of the military.
My thesis for my master's was all about spatial patterns of measles outbreak in the UK and how that was linked to social deprivation around the UK. And I finished that about 6 months before the first COVID cases hit the UK. And this led to a really interesting opportunity where I asked to be sent UK government to help with COVID response and analytics. That was a really tough 12 to 18 months, as most people that lived through that can attest to, for so many reasons. But the work that I did there got me recognition. The analytical processes that I put in place led to me being put on an industry list, which is called the Data IQ 100, which is the 100 most influential people in the UK for data and analytics. And that was the first year that someone in the military had been put on that list. But I would find interesting problems that I could solve with geospatial intelligence. And one of them was how we could increase our carbon sequestration across defense estates. We created this model which showed that you could increase about 16% afforestation rates across most of the UK training estates. That was published in a University of Oxford study, which was fantastic. And it also was the start of me really starting to get recognized by people outside of the military.
So it sounds like you managed to drive some visibility for yourself. Part of it was through being on the industry watch list. Part of it was people then starting to notice you. And just to kind of change gears here a little bit, as you think now about your eventual shift into the corporate world, if there was one or two things that you feel you did that opened that door for you, what do you think those were as you were making that transition?
I think the first one is self-marketing. My personal view is that people in the military, they do not like self-marketing. However, I'm a huge believer that we make our own luck, and part of that is being able to get over the initial embarrassment you may feel of marketing your own achievements, sharing what you have done and achieved. And the second part is networking. So I was very lucky in the industry watch list. I got to network with some exceptionally connected people, but maintaining those connections is hard work. And you just never know where a connection will bring you in the future. I think that that was, from my point of view, the pivot to get me out of defense. I promoted to the rank of major, and the kind of rules of promotion, once you hit major, it's unlikely that you will get a chance to be considered for the next rank, which is a lieutenant colonel, for 6 to 7 years. And for me, that was a little bit too slow. I would see that as a stagnation. And so I started having a look outside and seeing what else was there. My thing was I wanted to work in technology. So I reached out to multiple people across technology that I'd met over the last few years, but also were people who had also served in the military. So finding that mutual community group that you share values with, the chances are you already share a bond with that person through the experiences that you've jointly had, even if you didn't serve directly with that person. And they seem to be very amenable to helping one another out.
You've mentioned a few things there. I'd love to pick up on this idea of networking and also maintaining connections. And one of the questions I often get from clients and audience members, Luke, is I'm reaching out to people and two questions/concerns come up, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. One is, what do you say when you're reaching out to these people? And the second question is around, I've met this person, nothing's materialized. First of all, how do you reach out? And then how did you manage what happened afterwards, especially if what happened afterwards was nothing? How did you think about that in the context of networking?
I was reluctant initially to start reaching out cold to people. What I started with was posting about things that I was interested in. And actually, you find that you get engagement. So if someone likes your post and then you connect with them, or they comment on your post and then you connect with them, the chances are that they're going to accept the connection because they've seen what you're interested in. So I think part of it is be happy, whatever platform that you're interested in writing about, is start speaking about the things that interest you. And everyone, and I mean everyone, has something that would be interesting to talk about. It doesn't have to be what you're doing currently. It could be something completely different. But if there's something that you have a passion for, that you have an opinion on, start posting about it and then connect with those people. If someone doesn't want to connect with you, whether that be LinkedIn or, then I would be looking at in-person events. I've been told recently that I was old school, but I always carry cards with me.
I do too.
I've come away from conferences with, say, like 30 cards. I've not done it right away, but the next day I'll go through them and have a look and make sure that I've reached out.
Yeah, I think I handed you a card when we first met, and I'm a big fan of business cards and taking some notes on people and then following up the next day on those notes. So that's something that I always recommend people do. Going back to just the second part of that question is, what if people don't respond? Not even that they don't respond, but let's say you meet with them and nothing comes of it. You go, you meet, you have a great conversation, and so oftentimes I hear from people, nothing happens after that. How do you think people should think about the idea that things don't materialize into something concrete right away?
If you expect something to happen straight away, then you're thinking in a transactional networking mindset, which is not a healthy mindset, i.e., I met this person, they should do something for me. Networking is a long game. And so the earlier you can connect with someone and the more that you can keep that engagement going, the better. What I would say is, what's the phrase? Don't put down to malice what can be attributed to incompetence or something like that. But I'm not saying people are incompetent. What I'm saying is people are busy. You never know what's happening in someone's life. They may have just missed something. You may have gone to junk. You have no idea, but give it 2 or 3 rolls of the dice. Every now and then you send an update. After 2 or 3 times, if there's nothing there, it's clear that they don't want to talk to you. But the first time they don't respond, it may have been lost. It may have been a really bad day. You just don't know. So I wouldn't put it down to people not wanting to connect.
I think that's a great reminder. I think Tom Singer in the ABCs of Networking, he says that some people you reach out to are just not going to respond. Don't take it personally. It's exactly what you said. Look, you have no idea what's happening in their life. Just switching gears to the most recent chapter that you're now in, as you shift over to Google, I know that one of the seeds that got planted was you reached out to vets in Google, as I understand it. And that's how one of the ways you got your foot in the door. And I'd love to hear about your transition into Google, how you made that happen. And then we can talk a little bit about some of the things you're also working on the side here.
Google has a veterans network. I think a lot of big corporations have veterans networks. And I worked out the head of the veterans network where I was a chap called Henry Chin. And I reached out to Henry and said that I was interested in Google. I would love to come down and have coffee or just have a look around. And he was really kind and invited me down, showed me around and had a really, really good chat with me. And he gave me a few names. So then I followed out to those people. And the next guy, it turned out we'd been in the same unit together, although we didn't cross over. So I was like, hey, can I come down for lunch? So I think I visited maybe 3 times, 3 different people. What I would say is that was a help to me. So meeting those people, understanding their roles was a real help. What it doesn't do is it doesn't guarantee you a route in. You still have to apply like everyone else. You still have to go through the same interviews like everyone else and hit the same standards. It allows you to dial in to the types of roles that you would like to start your pivot with.
Now that you are at Google, can you fill me in on anything that has surprised you about what it took to get into Google, or even just life working at Google?
I love it. I love working here. I think the people are fantastic. I'm constantly amazed by the level of talent. You may have covered in other podcasts about people having imposter syndrome, but when you're dealing with people who are pushing one another because they are at the top of the bell curve for their area, you've got through the process. Back yourself. It's given me a chance to reflect on what I'm good at. I bring a new perspective. I come from a background that Google doesn't have a huge amount of people that have that experience. And so I bring something to the team dynamic that not many people have. And I think everyone in Google that does that brings something and it's valued.
I would love to talk a little bit now, Luke, about some of the lessons you've learned along the way of your journey. And I would love to start by, first of all, picking up on something you just mentioned, which is the idea that you're coming from a non-traditional, more atypical background and combining that with the earlier comments you mentioned about imposter syndrome. And I'm just curious, if somebody's listening to this and maybe they're working in an organization and they're a bit of an outlier and they feel like they're surrounded by all these people who are perhaps, at least they perceive them to be more skilled, talented, experienced, whatever. How would you recommend somebody deal with that? How have you dealt with that, if you've felt any of that?
The way to win in this world is to be very, very good at a few things and not worry about being good at everything. Be the known person for the thing that makes you the best. And I think too much at the moment, there's a push to be a generalist, and we can take the MBA, for example. It's a very general master's degree. But what it should be used is, it should be used to reinforce something that you're already great at. And I became super fortunate in that I was given a full scholarship to do my MBA by a charity called Heropreneurs, which is a defense charity which supports entrepreneurial-minded veterans and service leavers and also families. So I won this full scholarship, and you have to give a pitch and talk about what are you going to do with this opportunity. I used a quote in my pitch, and I love this quote. I use it all the time. And the quote is, "What stands in the way becomes the way." And find the thing that's holding you back and focus on that. That is your way now. So it doesn't have to be everything, but one thing at a time. So for me, I had in my head that I was in the military, and what was going to hold me back was I didn't know enough about business and finance and the corporate pillars that would hold me back in a civilian job. So that became the way, and that helped me into Sandhurst. And it also helped me on the way out of the army into industry.
Another question I had for you, Luke, just going back to one of your earlier points, was this idea of self-promoting without overly self-promoting. And this is a really tricky balance I know a lot of people, including me, struggle with. Can you walk me through how you think about ensuring that you're not bragging about yourself while also advocating for yourself? And how can you tell when you're doing too much of it? And how can you tell when you're doing too little of it?
I try and just stick to facts. I think that's the easiest way. If you have won something, or if you have published something, like saying that you've won something is not embellishing anything. Or, if you've published it, say, hey, I've wrote this paper, I'm throwing it out there, let me think, throw stones at it. And I think having maybe an inner circle of people that you trust to give you accurate advice that will tell you if you're going too far, and that you listen to those people.
That's great advice. Just be able to have people around you who can honestly and candidly sense check you without you getting too defensive about it, and being able to receive that feedback is so important. There's a quote, I'm sure you've heard this quote from Jim Rohn, saying that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So try to surround yourself, as you mentioned, with the types of people who are doing the things that you want to be doing. And that's a great place to start, and also a great place to get some feedback. Speaking of feedback, if we think about our own internal feedback, as you think about your very interesting career change journey, if you could go back and have a do-over with something along the way of your journey from the military into the private sector, into Google, is there anything that comes to mind, like what you might do differently now that you have the fortune of 2020 hindsight?
I think when I heard that I got a guaranteed job, I took my foot off the gas and I chose geography as my bachelor's degree. During my time in the military, I decided that I wanted to become a chartered engineer, but I didn't have an engineering background. So I had to work like super hard to overcome the fact that I had to use a lot more practical experience to get me through the process. And when I reflect on that, in my head, because I was going to the military forever, didn't matter that I had a BSc in geography. but it should have been, I know it should have been civil or mechanical engineering. And I do think about that a lot. It makes me think about what I'm doing now and say, is this thing that you are thinking is guaranteed, or you have a role? You have a role now, Luke. Are you taking a lazy choice professionally or personally because you are in this role? And if the answer is yes, then that is the thing that's in the way, and that becomes the way.
Speaking of continuing to keep pushing yourself and not getting complacent, Luke, can you wrap us up by telling me a little bit more about Antebellum Angels, which is a venture you co-founded in 2024 on top of your day job at Google?
So when I was on my MBA, I met another veteran called Jake, who is the co-founder of Antebellum Angels. And Jake and I had fell victim to what I call the friends, families, and fools raise of a startup. So we both knew a friend who was doing a startup, and they'd said, "Hey, we're raising some money. You're my friend. Do you want to invest in this company that I'm starting up?" And these were separate things, but we both did it, and we had no idea what angel investing was. And unsurprisingly, the things that we put money in didn't go very well. So we were talking about, but it's exciting. Angel investing is exciting. So how could we increase our chances of investing in things that would go well? Well, you invest in things that you know a lot about. Jake and I both knew enough about defense technology from our time in service. And we started looking, was there a group that invested specifically in defense technology startups in the UK? And we couldn't find one anywhere. And so Jake and I decided to set up the UK's first defense-first angel investing group for defense technology called Antebellum Angels. Since then, we have grown to about 30 people. Most of the people are ex-UK forces or civil servants that have left and have a speciality. And what we've created is this critical mass of 30 people who are able to technically analyze different startups in defense and determine whether they are investable for us as a group. And it's going really well.
Well, that's very exciting. I appreciate you taking me through your career journey and telling us more about your life in the British Army, and your transition into military spatial analytics and engineering, and your current role at Google, along with the importance of proactively connecting with others along the way. If people want to learn more about you or Antebellum Angels or the work that you're doing for Google, is there any place that people can go to learn more about you or to even connect with you?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to connect on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way to get hold of me.
Well, best of luck with your role at Google and also your work there at Antebellum Angels, and look forward to crossing paths with you again soon.
Cheers, Joseph.
So I hope you enjoyed hearing Luke's perspectives on networking, self-marketing, and addressing those things standing in the way of you reaching your goals. Now it's time to wrap up with today's Mental Fuel, where I'm going to share my reflections on maintaining relationships in your career and broader life. Before we get to today's Mental Fuel, I wanted to thank Wise for supporting this episode of the Career Relaunch podcast. Wise is the world's most international bank account. It lets you hold and convert multiple currencies all in one place, offering a smarter, simpler way to move money internationally without all the typical bank fees or foreign exchange commissions. It's what I've used myself for years to handle all my international money transactions and receive overseas payments. Try Wise for free at careerrelaunch.net/wise. This is the part of the show called Mental Fuel, where I finish the show with a brief personal story related to one of the topics we covered today, and wrap up with a simple challenge to help you move forward with your own career goals. So for today's Mental Fuel, I wanted to pick up on what Luke mentioned about networking being a long game, and that you shouldn't think about it in a transactional way. And this got me thinking about my own relationships, both personal and professional, and how important it is to do what I can to keep my important relationships alive and well. Now, this is a show focused on career, so I'm going to start by talking about how I approach maintaining professional contacts. But I also want to share a few reflections on personal friendships, which has been on my mind a lot lately. My career would not be where it is right now had it not been for certain people I've crossed paths with during my career journey, especially during the pivot points. Now, after I graduated from college, my very first job was working at Northwestern Mutual Financial Network in Honolulu, Hawaii, selling life insurance. And every morning before work, I took the same bus and I saw the same bus driver because I got on at the very first stop on his route. So we always chatted before he set off, and he was actually the first person who planted a seed in my mind about getting into broadcast journalism. He saw me reading the newspaper every morning on the bus. This is at a time way before smartphones existed. And he told me that he thought I had a nice radio voice and asked me if I ever thought about going into radio instead of selling life insurance. I ended up thinking about that and eventually reaching out to a few alumni from my university who lived out there in Hawaii, including one who put me in touch with the general manager at Hawaii Public Radio. And that's exactly how I eventually landed my first broadcast journalism role as a news anchor there at the station. That's just one example of how a series of interactions with people ended up opening the doors to a new job. Now, a lot of my jobs have actually come through my network. My first job in Washington, D.C. that I landed after I dropped out of medical school came through another alumni whom I reached out to cold, and she happened to be having lunch later that week with a guy she knew was going to be building a team at a startup health policy consulting firm there in Washington, D.C. She got my resume in front of him, and I ended up getting an interview there and eventually working there. Before I moved to London, during an initial scouting trip I'd made to the UK, I met up with a friend of a colleague of mine at Clorox, where I was working at the time in the Bay Area, stayed in touch with her, and when I moved out to London the following year, she was the one who put me in touch with the hiring manager at the company where I eventually interviewed and worked. And even these days, the vast majority of my client and speaking opportunities come through relationships and connections that I've built over the years. I share all this because I've seen time and time again in my life, in hearing from clients or audiences, how your professional networking ends up being the gateway to the next chapter of your career. But these relationships don't emerge overnight. As Luke mentioned, they take time, effort, and sincerity to build, and the return may not come until much, much later. These days, I'm very much in the mindset of trying to give back as much as I can to those in my professional network, whether they're clients or followers or listeners like you. I feel like I've really benefited over the years from people lending a hand to me at critical moments. So I really do try to give without any expectation of anything in return. I've found that if you can focus on the giving, that alone can be very rewarding, whether you're doing that with your professional network or your personal relationships. Speaking of which, one of the things on my mind lately has been the topic of friendship. And I suppose that as someone in my mid-40s right now, I've noticed that my friendships have gone through a bit of an evolution. In recent years, maybe due to life stage, aside from a handful of close relationships, I've definitely noticed a few of my older friendships have faded in terms of the frequency of communication, the presence in each other's lives, and just chances to see each other face to face. I'm pretty sure that those friends who have remained in my life are really only there because both of us have put in the time and the effort required to keep our friendships alive. I find this topic of friendship especially interesting right now because I'm starting to hear more and more stories from people who attend my networking workshops telling me that they've started to turn to AI for advice, feedback, mentorship, and plenty of other things that you would otherwise discuss with friends or people in your life. And the more I talk with people about the state of their relationships right now, both personal and professional, the more I feel like there's this crisis of human connection unfolding before our eyes where technology, streaming entertainment, social media, doom scrolling, and now AI companions are starting to fill the spaces that our friends, colleagues, and mentors once occupied. And although I don't have any hard data on this, I really feel like AI's only going to lead to a quiet but very clear trend toward adult friendships and professional networking experiencing a decline in both quality and quantity. In fact, I recently ran a survey on friendship, and based on the responses I've seen so far, just over 80% of the respondents said that they've made 3 or fewer close friendships in the past decade, and over half said they only formed 1 or no close friendships in the past decade. Interestingly, the number one thing that people said they wished their friends would do more of was to just check in more regularly. And this is useful to keep in mind with both your personal and professional connections, that it doesn't require huge amounts of effort. Even small gestures can go a long way. When was the last time you checked in with one of your close friends? Maybe this is someone you used to connect with regularly, but now maybe they live in another city or country. Maybe you are both in differing life stages, or maybe you've just both gotten really busy, which is pretty much the case for every single friend of mine in my life. Or when was the last time you dropped a note to that former colleague of yours whom you really clicked with? Or that mentor who helped you figure something out years ago? Or that recruiter who helped you land your current job? Or maybe that former client or customer you really loved working with, especially during moments when you don't need anything from these people? When was the last time you checked in with them? In a world increasingly dominated by virtual communications, AI, and quick text messages, maybe it's time for you to invest a few extra minutes to communicate with someone in a way that feels a bit more personal. Now, I know this is going to date me to say this, but recently I've returned to sending snail mail to important people in my life. And I'm talking about personal cards and postcards in the mail, which I know sounds so old-fashioned, but literally every single person who's been on the receiving end of this has told me they really loved it and they appreciated it. And they told me they couldn't remember the last time someone else took the time to do that. Now, of course, I also do plenty of digital communication, which is, of course, super convenient. But if I really want to signal effort and enthusiasm with someone virtually, I tend these days to send video messages instead of emails or text messages. I'm also just trying to get better at picking up the phone and calling people, which is something I'm not as good at doing anymore. No matter how you choose to connect with people or reconnect with those in your life, remember that you can only control what you do here. As is the case with any relationship, you can't control someone else's bandwidth to respond, their timeline to get back to you, or their reaction to your earnest attempts to remain in touch with them. So I hope you'll do it. I hope you'll reconnect with people. I hope you'll stay in touch with people, because I really believe that the best opportunities and experiences out there arise through relationships. And I think putting in the effort to keep important relationships alive in both your personal and professional life is absolutely worth it. This takes me to a quote from Robert Waldinger, the director of the longest running study on human happiness, which is the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And this is from his book, The Good Life. One crucial factor stands out for the consistency and power of its ties to physical health, mental health, and longevity. Contrary to what many people might think, it's not career achievement or exercise or a healthy diet. One thing continuously demonstrates its broad and enduring importance: good relationships. So my challenge to you is to think of one person out there who you've enjoyed connecting with in your professional or personal network, but just haven't really spoken to in a while. Someone who's been consistently energizing, helpful, supportive, or even inspiring to you. Or maybe it's just someone who makes you feel good when you're around them. Reach out to them just to check in and let them know you're thinking about them. But the bonus challenge here is to go beyond your usual ways of reconnecting, and maybe instead of just sending a text message or email or LinkedIn message, pick up the phone and call them, or record a voice note, or even a video message, or a card in the mail if you really want to change things up. I know it can feel a bit awkward to reconnect with someone if it's been a while since you've spoken. But just remember that every single day that goes by is another day that your relationship with them just fades. So don't wait. Just do it today. And you might be surprised just how much it brightens that person's day and your day too. If you want to share your thoughts on the topic of friendship, I'd welcome you filling out my friendship survey at careerrelaunch.net/friendship. and I've also included that link in the show notes here. It only takes a couple of minutes, and your input can really shape how I approach this topic of professional and personal relationships in my future networking workshops and articles. Also, speaking of recording a voice note for someone, if you've got a question about career change you want me to address on the show, or if you've got a story of career change in your own life you'd like to share, I'd love for you to leave me a voicemail with your thoughts at careerrelaunch.net/110, where you can also find a summary of my discussion with Luke. Again, that's careerrelaunch.net/110. Thanks so much for being part of the Career Relaunch community, and a very special thanks again to Luke Parker for sharing his unique story with us today. This episode was mixed by Liam McKenzie. Today's music was curated by Jonathan Rinaldi Pohl, and the Career Relaunch theme song was written and performed by Electrocardiogram. I'm Joseph Liu, and I hope you'll tune in next time when we've got Scott Lamb, VP of Content at Medium, joining us on the show to tell us about his career in journalism and share some tips on publishing your own writing online.